In the last video, we learned how to create a Google Forms and how to basically use it real quickly as a survey. Well, there's another major way that we can use Google Forms, and that is as collecting data from individuals. So in this particular video, we're going to be looking at how do we create Google Forms with sections, and then we're also going to use a semi-real world example of, say, a feedlot where we're trying to get data from individuals like maybe the feeder, the person who's actually applying the feed, a processor, and maybe a veterinarian as well. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So here we are at Google's homepage. I'm logged in under my Casperology account. I'm going to go to Drive and I'm going to create another Google Forms. So we're going to do that real quick. I'm going to go to my Drive. I'm going to find that shared folder that we've been working in. And then I'm going to create a new folder. Whenever I'm creating a Google Forms, I always want to start off with a brand new folder first. So I want to create a new folder, and I'm going to title this Feedlot. So we got our new folder called Feedlot. I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to create a new Google Forms. Then, like usual, I'm going to go ahead and give this one a title. And I'm not going to add a description to this one. This is going to be something that I'm going to send out to my employees, and I'm going to train them how to do it to where I don't really need a description. And then I'm going to add some questions here. So this first question I'm going to add is probably going to be something like date. I want to know when are they filling this information out. So that's the first thing I'm going to add. Then the second thing I'm going to ask is I want to know what their job title is. What is their job position? So this is going to be designed to where I'm going to have several different people working for me, and they're all going to be doing different activities, but I want one comprehensive log to see what they've done. So here I'm going to actually add a multiple choice. But this is going to be a key thing. We need to use a multiple choice on these job positions so that way they can select their job position, but it also helps set us up for something we're going to do a little bit later. So we've got three different positions. Maybe we've got the feeder position, we have the processor position, and then we have the veterinarian. So we have three different individuals that we want to track, three different people that we want to talk about. So we're actually going to create a section for each one. Now, in order to create a section, we come over here and we've got these different options. We've got this add a question that we've seen before. We can import questions, add a title and description, add an image, add a video. I want to go to add section. So I'm going to say add section. So then I'm going to go ahead and title this particular section. And I'm going to title it with the same names of the positions up here. That will help keep everything together in order a little bit easier later on. So my first section, or section 2 of 2, is going to be feeder. Now I want to add another section. So I'm going to come right here, add section, click on that. My third section, now that I've added section, this becomes 2 of 3. My third section, I want to label as processor. And then I want to add one more section to match my last multiple choice up here. And I'm going to call it veterinarian. Now essentially what I'm going to do, or essentially the way we're going to set this up, is we're going to send this survey out, or this Google Forms out, to all of the employees. Or the different employees that's going to be working on this feedlot. The feeder, I'm going to want to have him select feeder, answer a couple of questions, and click submit. And never have to go with the processor or the veterinarian. I'm going to have the processor do the same, and then the veterinarian do the same. So let's go ahead and add some extra questions on here. I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to add some extra questions on here under each of the sections, and then we're going to come back and look at how do we actually set this up and some of those examples. Okay, so I went in there and added questions for the last two sections, but not the feeder section. And I wanted to show you why I didn't do that, and I wanted to show you kind of another key thing. Whenever you're adding questions under a section, you need to be in that particular section. So for right now, I'm actually currently this question is highlighted, and if I add another section, it's going to add it below there. But what if I don't want to add a question there? What if I want to add a question under this feeder section? In order to do that, I'm going to need to click on this feeder section and then add my question. So you will always add a question underneath the active question that you're working on. So if we're currently under feeder, or if we're currently down here under processor and we need to add a question under feeder, we'll need to click on that feeder section to add that particular question. So I want to add a question right here, call it pin number. Now this is the active question, so I want to go ahead and add a question right below it, and I'm going to call it pounds of feed. So let's look at our survey real quick, or let's look at our Google Forms. We have feedlot up here, that's the name of it, what day, what was the position, the job position, and then we go to the feeder. So we're going to want the feeder to answer a couple of questions. Which pin number did they feed, and what was the pounds of feed? We're going to want the processor to answer a question. The processor is going to be processing the cattle as they're entering and exiting the feedlot. So we want to know, was this animal entering or exiting the feedlot? What was the tag number? And what was the weight? Then if we get down here to veterinarian, we're going to want to know what was the tag number and what was the action taken. Now, if you notice behind tag number, I wrote veterinarian. And now after tag number up here, I put processor to correspond with that particular section. Well, there's a reason I did that, because here in a little bit, we're going to link it to Google Sheets. And whenever we link it to Google Sheets, it would show up as just tag number here and tag number there. And it might get a little confusing in terms of, is this the tag number for the veterinarian or the tag number for the processor? So to keep it a little bit simpler, we're just going to add these little in parentheses tag number veterinarian and tag number processor. Those are just some little tricks that I've learned over the years. So we went ahead and added these questions, and we've got our form ready. Let's go ahead and send it out and go ahead and take this form. So we're going to jump up here. We send it out to our employees. Our employees get this, and let's say that I am the feeder. So we're going to say, all right, we're dealing with June 29, 2020, the feeder, and I click next. So I say the pin number is, let's say it's pin number 25. We put in there 267 pounds of feed, and I click next. Well, I'm the feeder. I don't want to be answering these processor questions. And to even get to and I'm a veterinarian, or I'm not a veterinarian, I don't want to be answering these questions. So I have to go through all this long process before I can ever hit submit. Let's look at it then from the processor standpoint. So we go and we say processor, so we click next. Well, we still have to answer feeder before we can get to the processor. That's not what we want. We want to set this Google Forms up to where it takes us directly to the section that we need. So in order to do that, after we've got our whole form set up, let's back up then and actually assign answer choices to particular sections. That's not why we have to create certain sections. So in order to do that, we're going to click on this question right here, and we're going to click on these three little dots. So it's the question of talking about the job position. It's the question that's going to dictate which section we're going to. So we've got this. We're going to click on these three little dots, and we're going to go to this answer choice right here. Go to section based on answer. So we click on that. And then beside these multiple choice questions, beside these answers, we can now select a certain particular section. So if we're a feeder, we want it to take us to section 2 feeder. Notice how I named feeder, the section 2 feeder, and it's going to correspond with this particular answer. I did that to where if you have a whole bunch of sections and you're trying to match questions up to particular sections, it makes it very easy to match the question answer to the section. So if we're a feeder, we want to go to section 2. If we're a processor, we want us to take it to processor. If we're a veterinarian, we want it to take us to veterinarian. So where we can go to section 2, feeder, section 3, processor, and section 4, veterinarian. Now, let's go ahead and see how that looks now that we've done that. So let's go ahead and preview it. So we want to go ahead and do today as the 29th, and we want to go to veterinarian. We can click next. it takes us directly to veterinarian. We don't have to go through the feeder or the processor anymore. We can fill out the information that we need and just click submit. Now let's see about it from the processor. So we click on processor, click next. Now we can say it takes us directly to the processor. It bypasses the feeder altogether to where we can enter in that information. So we go ahead and enter in our information and click next. But it takes us to veterinarian. So we can't just click submit yet. That's because we've done something a little bit backwards. We've got to go and actually add one more step. So let's do it for feeder. So if we click next, it's going to take us to the feeder, but then it still takes us to the processor and to the veterinarian. Well, we don't want it to do that. We want it to take us directly to the particular section that we need, and then we want it to end the survey right away, or in this Google Forms right away. So let's go back and look at that. And let's look at this main sheet now. And if we go to this feeder, so the way it normally would work, unless we're having it go to a certain section, is you take the first section, then you go to the second section, and then to the third section, and then to the fourth section. But at the end of each one of these sections, it says after section 2, continue to the next section, or you can select to have it go on to a specific section, or we can have it say submit form. If we go to a processor, the same thing. After a processor, we can have it go to a certain particular section or say submit form. So now that we click submit form, let's look at how it looks now. So let's go ahead and preview it. So we select the correct day and we say processor. It takes us directly to the processor because we selected go to section based on answer. But then down here it says submit. Well, that's because we said we want to submit the form after each section. So now if we click submit, that is going to be done. It's going to be submitted, and we should be good to go on that. If we click veterinarian, click next, well, there's our submit button to where we can answer just the questions pertaining to the veterinarian. If we want to go to feeder, we can click next, and it's going to take us just to feeder, and we can submit it right afterwards and answer only the questions that we need to answer for that particular section. And of course, we can add the different types of questions into these forms as well, just like what you saw in the last video where we were talking about the different types of forms where you could do a short answer, long answer, things like that. And matter of fact, in this particular example, we're going to be using a multiple choice. We're going to be using that date. We're going to be using a short answer text. We're actually going to be using again, short answer and multiple choice. We're going to be using short answer and long answer. Of course, you could add other questions such as check boxes and the drop downs, linear scale if necessary. So you can add all of these in. We're just adding sections in this video. Another thing to keep in mind is you can actually make certain ones required. For example, I would probably make this date required and this job position required. Frankly, you're going to need it in order to go on to the next step anyways, but I would just go ahead and make it required. And under this feeder aspect, maybe you definitely want to know what the pounds of feed that were being added for the day is. And maybe you need to know, or you should put in the PIN number, but it's not quite as important. So we're not going to make that required. Under this processor, maybe we want to make all this required. We want to know what they're entering in at. We want to know what their tag number is for sure. But maybe weight's not as big of a deal. They should enter that, but not so much. So we're not going to leave it required. So just like we saw in the last video, you can make certain questions required, certain ones not required. Essentially, the main thing that you need to know out of this video is actually how to create sections with using this little button right here, adding a section, and then making that first question, one of those first questions, a multiple choice, and then going to those answers, clicking down here and saying go to section based on answer, selecting those certain sections. And then the last thing you need to make sure you do is click submit form under each one of those sections. What you will notice is that under this veterinarian tab, the last section, there is no submit form. Well, the reason for that is it's the last section. It's going to automatically submit that form afterwards anyways. Another thing that you'll need to do that I like to always do is always link it to a spreadsheet. So whenever I'm done with my all of my Google Forms in the way I want it to be, I'm going to create a new spreadsheet. I'm going to label this feedlot responses. Say create. And it's going to create that spreadsheet. And of course, it's going to place it right there in that same folder that I created my Google Forms in. And essentially, we're going to be good to go on that. And essentially, that's what you need to know, is how to create those sections, link those questions, answer choices to a particular section, and then click Submit Form after each section.